Hello and welcome, my name is Shadow and welcome back to another Warframe video. Today we are talking about Chroma. Now this is a video I never thought I would actually make, well at least not until Chroma got reworked. But Chroma actually has gotten a few buffs recently, and I intend to be making a profit taker guide video soon using Chroma, so I thought it would be worthwhile to actually make a Chroma build video, especially because although in most circumstances Chroma is one of the worst Warframes in the game, in fact if it wasn't for his unique ability to double credit drops, he would be the worst Warframe in the game. He does actually have another unique trait that works with a specific item in the game that actually makes him pretty okay. I hesitate to say good with Chroma in any facet of the context, because even with this build, which is capable of doing a large amount of damage, as you can see, it's still Chroma. So yeah. Anyway, before we judge Chroma too hard, let's get straight into his kit. Chroma's passive gives him a second mid-air jump. There's literally nothing else to this. It doesn't synergize with anything. It literally just gives him a second mid-air jump. Pretty useless overall. It's there, it's kind of cool. You get some wings on your back when it happens, but it doesn't offer anything gameplay-wise except just having a second jump. Chroma's first ability is called Spectral Scream. It will have Chroma breathe fire from his breath. While he's breathing fire, he has full mobility, however he can no longer use any of his weapons. The damage type it deals is one of the 4 primary elements, and it is dependent on the damage type you select. Tapping the ability will allow you to switch between the damage type, while holding the ability will turn on and turn off the ability. The ability will drain energy while it's on. Enemies that get hit by the ability will take some damage from that damage type and apply the status effect, and then it will have the status effects be applied to areas also in the area. The issue with this ability is it does basically no damage, and it isn't good for priming either, as you can't have it on at the same time as you use your weapons. So you'd have to switch between it, and it's not really something that you'd really ever use. Chroma's second ability is Elemental Ward, and it will give Chroma a specific buff and all allies within range, depending on the element that is currently being selected by his first. However, if you have your first Helminth off, your emission color will dictate the buff you get from your second. The 4 buffs are the heat buff, which will give Chroma additional health, which is additive with health mods such as Vitality, as well as do a tiny bit of heat damage to enemies around him, though basically none. The electricity buff will give Chroma additional shields, which is additive with mods such as redirection, and enemies that deal damage that Chroma takes will be redirected back at that's not right. When Chroma takes damage, he will release an electrical discharge at enemies, which is equal to the damage he takes but multiplied. However, this still doesn't do enough damage to kill most enemies. The cold buff will give him increased armor, which again is additive with mods such as steel fiber, and any damage that he takes will be redirected at enemies multiplied, similar to Mess's third ability. However, once again, it is still not enough. It still doesn't do a lot of damage. The first 3 buffs are all pretty useless as well, which is a common theme with Grover's kit, as extra health is air, extra heat, extra electricity, extra shields is air, and extra armor is probably the worst of them, since it isn't a lot of extra armor, and Chroma has another ability that gives way more armor that is actually good in terms of the amount of armor it gives you. So overall, these 3 buffs really don't offer anything that great as in terms of a buff, and the damage they do is basically not even enough to speak of. The Toxic End buff, however, the last buff, is actually useful for this specific build. What the Toxic buff does is it will give Chroma increased reload speed, once again and it will give him a holster damage buff. The holster damage buff, however, is base damage, meaning additive with mods such as Serration or Accolade Arcanes, which is also air. So overall, the whole ability is just except for this one specific build. This is Chroma's Helminth ability, but again, the ability is The augment of Chroma's second ability is whenever enemies walk out of the radius of Elemental Ward, they will keep the buff for the remaining duration. Normally, without this augment, Elemental Ward's buff acts similarly to the way Total Eclipse works, which is whenever they are within range while Elemental Ward is activated, they will receive the buff, but when they walk out of range, they will lose the buff. However, this augment is not worth modding on, as none of the buffs from Vex Armour is really that good anyway. Chroma's third ability is Vex Armour. Vex Armour gives 2 buffs at the same time. However, once the ability is initially activated, they start off at 0, and then depending on the ways that the buffs can be triggered, as they can be buffed in 2 ways now, you will gain the buff. The first buff is Scorn, which will give Chroma extra armor, which again is additive with mods such as Steel Fiber. The way you get Scorn is by taking damage to your shields. However, Chroma has recently been buffed that if you get melee kills while Vex Armour is activated, you will increase the amount of armor you get from Scorn, until obviously you reach the max amount of armor you can get from the ability, which is based off power strength. However, with pretty easily you can get a lot of extra armor from this ability, which means I believe on my build we're going to close to 1000% extra armor, which will give me 90% damage reduction from armor. So because of the insane amount of armor this ability can actually give, it actually makes armor good. So in terms of armor, Vex Armour is actually a very good ability. However, its other buff, not so much. Its other buff is a base damage buff. However, you gain the base damage buff from taking damage to your health. This is incredibly annoying and inconvenient to do, as your shields get in the way of it. Even when, back in the old meta, when everyone would run around with the Decaying Dragon Key to run their shields, your shields will still get in the way of you taking damage to your health, making it annoying to build up a base damage buff that requires you to take damage from your health. And after it, you only ever got a base damage buff, which is additive with Serration and the Acolyte Arcanes, which really isn't that special. The ability once again has been buffed recently at the same time as the other buff occurred, that made it so the ability will receive... That made it so that you will gain the extra Fury buff, which is the base damage buff, whenever you get ranged kills, making it a lot easier to build up, meaning the ability is made a lot better by this, as it makes the ability's damage buff a lot more consistent. However, it is still only a base damage buff. If you recast the ability before it deactivates, it will reset the timer of the ability without getting rid of your current buff percentages. Meaning, if the ability fully runs out of duration and you reactivate it, you will once again need to rebuild up the percent that you get from your buffs by either killing with melee / ranged weapons or taking damage to your health / shields. But if you reactivate the ability before the duration runs out, the ability's duration refreshes and you won't have to rebuild up your buffs. They will stay at whatever they were when you reactivated your ability, which is pretty good. This ability actually does have 2 augments. One of them is useless. The other one is a newer augment, and once again is one of the other buffs that Chroma recently received. The first one will send out a pulse whenever Chroma takes damage while Vex Armour is activated. If you take damage to your shields, you will do puncture damage. Puncture damage sucks. If you do damage to your health, you will do blast damage, which sucks more. And neither do damage, like, at all. So it's pretty much just a wasted slot. You want to use it whenever you want to make your life more difficult by literally just limiting the amount of slots you can have on a Warframe. However, his other augment is useful. His other augment makes Chroma take 50% of your allies within range's damage to your health specifically. This augment was introduced before the buff that was made that you would gain the Fury and Scorn buff from weapon kills. So essentially this augment made getting the Fury buff much more consistent, as you would be able to take damage from your health without having your shields completely depleted by taking some of the damage your allies receive. And I believe it works that your allies could be taking damage to their shields and you would take some of that damage as your health. In addition to this, however, every time you get a squad kill, your health would be restored, making Vex Armour also a healing ability, making Chroma really good for health tanks. Honestly, Vex Armour might actually be the single best ability for a health tank build because of the insane amount of armor it gives you and the fact that it heals you with the augment. And also on squad kills, it will increase the duration of the ability, capping out whatever your max modded duration is, meaning as long as you keep getting kills, the duration of the ability will never run out, meaning you never have to worry about recasting the ability to reset it before it runs out of duration, or if you don't do that, never have to worry about having to rebuild up your stack. You can only do it once and the ability will stay active the whole time. And it does say squad kills, which means anytime anyone in your squad, including yourself, gets a kill. Though I don't think it works on companion kills. But yourself and your teammates, whenever they get a kill, you will be healed and you will increase the duration of Vex Armour, making it a very good mod for Chroma. Chroma's fourth ability is Effigy, and it follows the similar theme of having useless abilities. Effigy will spawn a dragon, which although looks cool, does nothing. It will just sit stationary, it will not move, it will not follow you around, and it will attempt to attack enemies. I say attempt because it will spew fire at them, but not do any damage whatsoever. The augment for this ability will allow you to move the augment by holding the ability down, which will direct the sentinel to the location your aiming reticle is currently looking at. However, the ability isn't worth using anyway, and therefore doesn't make sense to use the augment. However, the ability does have an additional effect that any credits that are dropped around the ability will be doubled. This gives Chroma the unique ability to double credit drops, the only Warframe in the entire game that can do this. Because of this unique ability to double credit drops, Chroma is the meta Warframe for credit farming Profit Taker, and that alone is the only reason why Chroma isn't the worst Warframe in the game, as he is at least somewhat useful. Now, I know I've been ragging on Chroma a lot, saying that he is a very bad Warframe, and unfortunately it is true, but I actually think Chroma is a very cool Warframe stylistically, and he is probably up there with one of my favorite Warframes stylistically, and he is the Warframe whose rework I have anticipated more than anything else. Both the Inaros and the Hydroid rework were really cool, and both Inaros and Hydroid were worse than Chroma before their reworks. Even without considering Chroma being the meta for Profit Taker, they were still worse than Chroma in other contexts, which really says how bad they were. So they definitely needed reworks more than Chroma. But now that they've been reworked, I do hope the next one we see is Chroma, because I think Chroma has a really cool kit, and I think a reworked Chroma could be really good and really cool, and he definitely has been a pretty good Warframe in the past. He has just unfortunately been power creeped quite a lot, and hasn't been able to keep up with the current game. This said, he does have synergy with the arcane Exodia Contagion, which shouldn't come as a surprise to a lot of people, as this is a pretty common knowledge and pretty common build for Chroma. However, both the damage buff from Vex Armour and the holster damage from the Toxic Elemental Ward aren't base damage when factored in for Exodia Contagion. They are counted as multiplicative, meaning both of them count as Eclipse. And the damage buff you get from Vex Armour is actually a higher damage buff from Eclipse in terms of percentage. On Mirage, it is a higher damage buff than a Mirage Eclipse. Not the weak, stupid, bad Helminth Eclipse. The actually good Mirage Eclipse. It is better. Normally that wouldn't matter because it's base damage, but as a multiplicative damage buff for Exodia Contagion, it does a lot of damage, and it's really good actually that it can actually just do stupid amount of damage, making both Chroma's third ability not only arguably the best health tanking ability because of the stupid amount of armor it gives, as well as the healing it gives, but also give you an insane multiplicative damage buff, while his second ability is also giving you another multiplicative damage buff. And Holster Amp and Vigorous Swamps that also give base damage on Holster when hosted are also multiplicative with Exodia Contagion, which you bet we will be using on this build. So the damage this build does is just a bit silly. And of course we pair it with Breach Surge, which will be our Helminth ability, which makes it a bit more silly. With the Helminth ability, you can replace either his 4th or 1st ability, as they're both useless. So it's up to you which one you want to get rid of. I recommend getting rid of his 1st ability, because if you get rid of the 1st ability, your 2nd ability will give you the buff to whatever your mission color is. This essentially means you won't accidentally swap the elemental ward buff you're getting to one of the other elements, missing yourself out on that toxic elemental ward buff, as it's the only good one, and you can only activate one elemental ward buff at a time anyway, as you can't recast the ability. So I say get rid of the 1st ability, because that will fix your elemental ward buff into the toxic elemental ward by just setting the emission color to green. Very quickly, for the emission colors of all the elements, reds, oranges, and yellows, I think yellows, but at least reds and oranges are obviously heat, whites are cold, blues and purples are electric, and greens are toxic. However, if you're unsure, the element that you're getting from the emission colors will be shown with the emission. It's also only the 1st emission color slot that matters, so don't worry about the 2nd one. As you can see, we are set to toxic. But if I set it to something like black, which I'm honestly not sure what it'll be, I can set it to black and we can see it's cold. I thought it was cold, but I wasn't sure. Then we can set it to, let's do this color. I'm gonna say this is probably heat, but I'm not sure. Yes, it's heat. So if you're unsure what emission color what element you're getting, then it will tell you right here the mission. But it's also very simply that if you don't care what the emission color is and you just click one that you know is going to be heat, or you click one that you know is going to be electric, or you click or cold, like you can simply just go white, blue, red, and green, and you know you're going to get the right element for you. Just quickly, I wanted to explain the generic setup system with this build, as it does take a bit of a setup. So I'm just going to start the survival mission here, and I'll explain the setup. Obviously, we start the mission, then I'm going to cast my 3rd and 2nd ability. And to begin, I'm actually going to activate Contagion, because Contagion is going to proc Dexterity for my primary, and then I'm going to kill some enemies with my primary, and we should see pretty quickly that we'll build up, where is it? Yeah, it's right here. So we've already built up our max fury buff just from those 2 slots with our primary, and now we just need to get max combo with our primary. So we're just going to go around hitting enemies with our normal primary. And we do like to use Breach Surge. I like to use Breach Surge while I'm doing this, as it gives me some survivability by crowd controlling the enemies. But yes, my 2nd's already deactivated, so I'll go ahead and reactivate that. So yeah, we're just building up combo, we're almost there. And now that we're at max combo, we can just destroy everything. For the Archon Shards, we do have a few things, but most of these are for my Helminth build. We do have 2 Towerforged Blues for health, but we will be using Arcane Blessing on this build, so these are most definitely not needed. With them, I do have over 200 health, which makes him a very good health tank, and yes, of course the build is a health tank build, but not needed for this build. We do have a Preparation Archon Shard, a Towerforged one again. If you don't have Towerforged ones, that's fine, you can use regular ones, but it's really easy to get Towerforged ones these days, so to each your own, use whichever ones you want. This one is also not needed, this is just my personal preference, as I don't like dropping energy pads at the beginning of every mission, so I just like to run Preparation or Xeneric, which we aren't using, as a replacement. However, for this build, I do recommend using both Amber casting speed Amber Shards to give you that 50% casting speed, as Elemental Ward does feel a bit sluggish without it, and so does Breach Surge. For the build, obviously, in the Aura slot, we do have Holster Amp. Holster Amp is going to give us that multiplicative damage buff for Exodia Contagion. We do have Prime Sure-Footed, as it is a massive increase to our survivability and DPS, as if we get knocked down, not only aren't we killing or dealing damage to enemies while we're knocked down, but it's also a big window where enemies could kill us. So Prime Sure-Footed is a big boon for any build, so I definitely recommend using Prime Sure-Footed. We also have Vigorous Swap, as it is also multiplicative with Exodia Contagion. Now, with Vigorous Swap, Holster Amp, and the Toxic Elemental Ward, you're probably thinking, what if I don't want to have to worry about holstering my weapons before shooting off the Exodia Contagion? Well, you don't have to worry about that because that naturally happens. Unless you've hold down the melee button, which sticks the melee weapon, which you shouldn't do. You should just click it, which will bring out the melee weapon. When you jump in the air, Exodia Contagion requires you to aim glide and then melee hit, which fires out the actual Contagion projectile. When you fly in the air, even if your melee weapon is out, unless, again, like I said, you've forced the melee out by holding the melee weapon, your Warframe will automatically switch to your ranged weapon, whether it be your secondary or primary, depending on whichever one you had active last. That is a holster right there. Then when you click the melee weapon, while in the air, while aim gliding, you will switch back once again to your melee weapon, which is another instance of holstering, which both cases will trigger Vigorous Swamp, Holster Amp, and the Toxic Elemental Ward. We do have Primed Flow for energy economy. If you don't have Primed Flow, obviously just use the regular flow. Adaptation for additional armor, damage reduction. As you can see here, we have almost 1000% armor increase, which will basically take our 450 armor to 4500 armor, which gives us above 90% damage reduction from armor, meaning adaptation plus Vex armor is going to give us 99% damage reduction, which is a lot of damage reduction. Prime Continuity for a little bit of duration. We don't need that much duration, as Vex Armor will run for infinite thanks to the augment, but we do want a bit of duration for Elemental Ward. As you can see, we have Elemental Ward sitting around 32 seconds. And then we just want to jam-pack this with Strength, Blind Rage, Umbra Intensify, and Transient Fortitude for our Strength mods, as that's really what we want here. Strength increases the damage buff we get from the Toxic Elemental Ward, Strength increases the amount of damage Breach Surge does, and Strength increases armor buff, the damage increase buff, and the health regen rate from Vex Armor with the augment. So we definitely want a lot of Strength. Then we have Guardian Armor, which is the augment. And we have Vigorous Swap, which I believe I already mentioned, but it's so important it gets mentioned twice. Archon Energize for energy economy. You don't have to cast abilities that often, so you shouldn't have that bad energy economy. Archon Energize should be all you need. And then Arcane Blessing, which will of course give us increased health up to 1200 whenever we pick up a health orb, and this stacks on top. So since we have current health of 820, thanks to my Archon Shards, we will be having over 2000 health. Without the Archon Shards, I believe Chroma has a base health of around 400. This will still take you to 1600 health with Arcane Blessing. The Zaw we're using is the Bala. It uses the Vajay 2 Jai Link, the Gupaye Grip, and of course the Bala Strike. The build for it is a very simple Exodia Contagion raw damage build. We have Prime Pressure Point, as we won't be applying status effects, so we want to get Prime Pressure Point instead. If you don't have Prime Pressure Point, use Sacrificial Pressure. Normally, regular Pressure Point is actually better than Prime Pressure Point. The only circumstance where Sacrificial Pressure is better than Prime Pressure Point is if we're using Sacrificial Steel as well, which we are. Without that case, Pressure Point is better. Sacrificial Pressure also needs to be max to be better than Prime Pressure Point, even with Sacrificial Steel. So if you don't have a max Sacrificial Pressure, Pressure Point is better. Prime Pressure Point is better than both. Prime Pressure Point is still better than Sacrificial Pressure, even with Sacrificial Steel. So definitely use Prime Pressure Point if you have it. We have our Corrupted mod. Corrupted mod is multiplicative with base damage, and all of our other Vigorous Holster Amp damage plus Vex Armor is multiplicative with our faction mod, so definitely use the faction mod. Don't sleep on them, they are a massive increase to your damage. We do have Blood Rush, Sacrificial Steel, and Gladiator Might in way of crit chance. We want to max out the crit chance as much as possible so we can get that juicy red crits, as we will have 12 times combo. We don't care about status chance, hence why we're not using Weeping Runes. We do, of course, want critical damage, so we'll use Organ Shatter and Gladiator Might, which also gives us critical damage. For our elements, we are running Toxic, which is fantastic against any enemy with shields, as it bypasses shields. Radiation, which is fantastic against alloy armor. And finally, we have Corrosive from melee exposure. We simply just need to cast Brute Surge every now and then, and we should get a 240% corrosive buff from melee exposure, giving us Corrosive, which is great against Fossilize, which is an infested health type, and Ferrite armor. So this setup is very good and very powerful. The companion we are using is the Panzerwelperpfeiler. The Panzerwelperpfeiler works really well with this build for a few reasons. First of all, because of Viral Quills and Panzer Devolution, oh my goodness, couldn't say that word, both of which give viral priming. Also, Panzer Devolution will make Panzerwelperpfeiler regenerate faster than normal companions, while also still being able to be useful while priming enemies with viral. Viral priming will of course increase our DPS, but also because of this mod here, which is unique to all Welperpfeilers. This mod essentially gives you a health tank, a health gate. If you were to take fatal damage, this will, I believe, does it make you invulnerable for a period? No, I don't think it makes you invulnerable, but it will heal you while the companion downs itself, and the companion will then need to regenerate. But very good, it gives you a health gate, meaning this is a very good build on all health tanking builds, as one of the biggest issues with health tanking is the lack of a reliable gate. So this mod will give you that. Additionally, we have Tenacious Bond and Bite, which will be increasing our crit damage on our Bala Exodia Contagion build, which is very useful. We have Pack Leader for the survivability of a Welperpfeiler, as even on Contagion hits, which counts as a melee hit for both Vex Armor and Pack Leader, we will be healing our companion and be giving it up to 1200 Overguard. We have Link Vitality for some additional survivability for our companion. We have Fetch for obvious reasons. And then we have Synth Deconstruct, which synergizes with Arcane Blessing, as it will make enemies drop additional health orbs. Additionally, for Synth Deconstruct, the viral quills that the Panzer fires out do count as hits for Synth Deconstruct, so Panzer is actually really good for creating a lot of health orbs for Synth Deconstruct, which synergizes really well with Arcane Blessing. And then finally we have Tandem Bond. I believe the viral quills also synergize with Tandem Bond, making Tandem Bond work really well on Panzer. Even if it doesn't, it's still a really good mod, as unfortunately Exodia Contagion doesn't build up combo. So we will have to intentionally hit enemies with our actual Zaw to build up combo. But once we get to 12 times combo, we shouldn't need to ever hit another single enemy with our actual melee, as our companion will hit enemies, which will reset our melee combo, making Tandem Bond a must-have for this build. Now we're going to over to our utility weapons. You'll notice I'm using the Kuvabrema instead of the Zaw. That's because I will actually be using the Kuvabrema to kill enemies to build up my base damage buff, as ranged weapons is what builds up the base damage buff. So let's actually look at the build. This is a very, very basic, regular build. Ignore corrosive, it's not corrosive, it is a viral slash build. It is a very basic rifle build in general. As is a quiver weapon, I have inherent toxic, and then I have modded cold to give me viral, and then we get our slash from hunter munitions. Everything else is just crit chance, crit damage, faction damage, multi-shot, fire rate, and then as it is a ranged weapon, we also have primed firestorm. And then we get our base damage from primary dexterity, as we will be killing enemies with melees, Exodia Contagion, which will give us a big base damage buff. Also, Vex Armor will also do the same. Bitch Supplies is also really good for extra crit chance and the ammo pickup. Definitely something you need on Kuvabrema. You can copy and paste this build as a normal DPS build for the Kuvabrema, however I would recommend replacing Dexterity with Merciless. Dexterity is also really good with this build specifically, as it will give us that combo duration increase for Exodia Contagion. For Epitaph, we are just using my generic primer build. It doesn't matter what you use as your secondary, as I won't be using Epitaph with this build. I just bring it on basically every build I have. Just make sure whatever secondary you are using, you're using out a max secondary dexterity for that increased combo duration. And then finally, our focus skill is Nemeron. Normally, I say that you can choose whichever focus skill you want, depending on the different buffs they give, but with a melee build, you only ever really want Nemeron. It's the only thing that makes sense, as Nemeron has the nice little passive power strike, which makes it so instead of your combo counter decaying fully whenever your combo duration runs out, it only lowers by 5, meaning your combo duration is a lot easier to upkeep. Anyway, that is the Chroma build. I hope you enjoyed. Yes, it's true, Chroma has severely been power crept, which is unfortunate. I really hope he gets a rework soon, as I think he is a really cool Warframe, and I think he's really fun to play. But even with how power crept he is, this build still works really well, and still shows you that you are still capable of doing a lot of damage even with some of the worst Warframes. Meaning it doesn't really matter in most cases if you're running a good Warframe or bad Warframe, as long as you're having fun, which is a lesson you should take with the whole game in general. In addition to that, I do hope you check out some of my other stuff. I have a second YouTube channel for just regular Let's Play content, and I have a TikTok and Instagram for this, specifically for this channel. And I also have a Warframe clan Discord if you want to come join our clan, or you can just join the Discord if you want to hang out with some people, or join our alliance, which is more active than our clan Discord, and just come and hang out with us. That'd be really cool, and you'd definitely be more than welcome to. But until next time, bye bye!